Good afternoon. My name is CJ Taylor. I'm the Raymond S. Markowitz President's Distinguished Professor in the Computer and Information Science Department here at the University of Pennsylvania. And today I want to take this opportunity to talk briefly about how the ENIAC project and the development of computing has profoundly impacted and enabled our subsequent efforts to build intelligent autonomous robots. And I wanted to illustrate that point by briefly describing some of the robotic projects that we've been working on here at the GRASP Lab at the University of Pennsylvania. So, but as so many speakers before, it's a good opportunity for us to reflect upon the ENIAC project and all that it was. So many of these numbers you've seen before. I will comment on a few that I think are going to be relevant to what I'm going to be talking about. So the original ENIAC, as described here, is 30 short tons, took 1,800 square feet, as Professor DeHaan mentioned. Also 150 kilowatts of energy. So those numbers I think are kind of relevant and important as we think about how things have evolved subsequently. So you may be aware of a famous misprediction, somewhat apocryphal, by the chairman of IBM, who in around 1943 predicted that the entire market for computers in the United States would be 5. Now, of course, many years later, we realized that he was off by a factor of around 1 billion. And that, of course, has a lot to do with the invention of the transistor and the subsequent miniaturization that was made possible by VLSI, which basically have allowed us to replicate many times over the fundamental computing elements that are required to build these kinds of computing systems. So we've found ourselves in this virtuous cycle where computers would get smaller, faster, and cheaper year over year, which has brought us to where we are at this moment. So let me relate this a little bit to my own career. So this is actually pictures from a self-driving car project back in 1997 that I was involved in. So specifically, I was responsible for designing software that would take the information from a set of cameras behind the rear view mirror and use that to actually compute controls to keep the car on the road. And at that point in time, around 1997, the computer that was required to actually keep up with the data rate required to process video in real time and generate those commands took up the better part of the trunk of this computer. So nowadays, of course, this kind of computation can be easily fit into a small embedded computer that can be hidden readily behind the dashboard and provided as a service. So even over the relatively short span of my career, I've lived to see sort of the virtue of this cycle, making things increasingly powerful and possible. So with that, let's sort of move on and talk about how this trend has allowed us to contemplate building increasingly sophisticated autonomous systems, like this autonomous flying robot project that I was involved with. This is a project that I undertook with Dean Kumar and a number of other faculty here at the University of Pennsylvania, where the goal was, as I said, to build this completely autonomous flying robot platform. So to give you an idea of where that what this platform was doing, the intention was that you'd be able to give the platform a relatively high level goal, such as moving out in a particular direction for a particular amount of time. And what you're seeing here is a little bit of an idea of what's going on inside the computer's brain, as you will. So as it's moving, it's gathering information from a laser rangefinder. It's using it to build a local map of the environment, and it's using that map to actually produce a plan for what it's going to be doing next, which is sort of rendered by that purple plan. So here you see it actually going into the, approaching its target, discovering various obstacles in its way, and actually using its computational ability to actually figure out what to do next. And actually, probably it's important to understand here that computation is enabling things at a variety of different levels. So first and perhaps most fundamentally, unlike a fixed wing aircraft, a quadrotor like this, it only stays in the air because we have computational systems that are capable of computing fairly sophisticated nonlinear controls at the rate of several thousand inputs per second. So that capability is what allows us to keep these things in the air in the first place. The second form of computation is clearly the one that we're using to actually sense the environment, make sense of it, and actually to come up with good plans about where we're supposed to be going. And that's what's enabling this level of autonomy that you see being demonstrated here. So since this is the theme of my talk is on evolution, it also seems useful to point out the kind of evolutions that we went through in this project. So on the left, you're seeing an original platform that we worked on. We call it the Falcon 450, 450 for the number of millimeters from one rotor to another. And what we were asked to do is actually continually downsize and downsize to get over here to this final platform we ended up, which we call the Falcon 250. So this is a platform that's less than half the size and with less than half the weight. This was a challenge, an engineering challenge that we were presented by this project. So this again is showing the Falcon 250 in a little bit more detail with a 12-inch ruler showed here for scale. And again, this is a complete system where all of the elements required for sensing, for computation, for autonomy are actually embedded on the platform itself. So the key to getting this work was to work on integrating our solution ever more tightly. So what we did here was work with our partners at the Open Source Robotics Foundation, in particular Morgan Quigley, to develop a system that integrated all of our sensors and our computes on a single system. So this system consists of a pair of stereo cameras, an inertial measurement unit, a field programmable gate array, and NVIDIA TX2 embedded computer embedded on a single platform. It weighs a little less than 200 grams and consumes a little less than 20 watts of power. And the reason that I point this out is that this is an example, I think, of a theme going forward, which is our ability to take computation and start directing it towards the edge. So instead of a computer being something that lives in a large building or in pleasant air conditioning, computers, by virtue of the fact that they're being able to get smaller, by the virtue of the fact that we're able to decrease the amount of power that they require, we're able to place them closer and closer to sensors, to actuators, where that proximity enables a whole new class of applications and new capabilities that we're able to exploit forward. So just to finish this story on this, in this context, the reason that we were asked to miniaturize our platform to this extent was that what we had in mind was missions of this kind. So again, we wanted to be able to task these autonomous flying robots at a very high level. In this case, the task is to approach a building, to find an opening, to navigate through that opening. And this that window size there kind of explains why we wanted to get down to ever smaller dimensions. We had basically 2 inches of clearance on either side, given our new platform. Once inside, what our system would do is automatically explore the environment. And as it explores, it would actually look for relevant architectural features, in this case, staircases. And if it found a staircase, it would go into its staircase descent mode, which would enable it to ultimately get down to the ground floor. And ultimately to exit the building. So again, the entire sequence is being done automatically. So all of the decisions that this computer needs to make in order to accomplish this task are being done on board the robot. And this is just a little idea of what the world looks like from the perspective of the robot. So here you can see, get a sense for the kind of representations the robot is building internally, along with its thought process. Again, the purple line indicates what the robot is hoping to be able to do next. Okay, so the previous project sort of exemplifies one of the core problems that we want to address in robotics. Namely, how do we endow our robots with spatial awareness that will help them to navigate through and interact with the world? So this has been one of the core concerns of ours. And to illustrate what that problem looks like from the perspective of our robots, I'm showing you a robot's eye view of the world. And this video illustrates the various kinds of robots that we end up working with in our lab. So from wheeled robots operating outside, to legged robots operating underground, to flying robots operating in forest environments and urban environments and the like. All of these are examples of systems that we would like to make increasingly intelligent. We would like to endow them with the ability to understand their environment and to use that information to make intelligent decisions about what they're going to do next. Now, one of the most commonly used modalities for addressing these kinds of problems is Lidar, which is a form of laser-based radar, which allows us to sense the distances between the robot and its environment. And so one of the things that we've worked on is effective ways of using Lidar to build representations. So this is work done by my former PhD student, Anthony Cowley, who has worked on techniques for building such representations. And one of the key ideas that we're using in this work is to build these atlas-based representations. So it's sort of inspired by the idea that we want to build local representations of places. And in this case, we're going to capture these local representations using panoramic depth image. So think about a panoramic image that you might have seen before, where at every pixel location you store depth. You can also store other kinds of information, but depth is probably one of the most common. So what I'm showing you here is an example of a representation that we've actually built from one of our platforms, in this case, our ground-based vehicle, which is takes data as it's moving around in this environment. And below what you're seeing is a final representation of all that the robot figures out about this environment as it walks through the world. So again, a key point here is that this representation that you're seeing here is actually composed of a set of local places on the order of a few dozen local maps. But combined together, these local maps contain enough detail that you can actually make out fine features like individual poles on the fence or laundry on the line, as well as the overall 3D structure of the world. So a great basis on which to do things like planning, to understand the shape and the size of various objects as one's working around. Now, equally important, one of the things that we really appreciate about this representation approach is that it allows us to actually compute things very effectively. So here we're able to build this kind of representation in real time on embedded computers that are around the size of a credit card and that consume less than 15 watts of power. And so this is done by actually figuring out how to effectively parallelize these kinds of algorithms so that they can actually be run efficiently on these kinds of small scale computers that we want to be able to apply at the edge. So we've actually been able to take this idea a little bit further. This is actually a task. The task that we were able to tackle is something that you've probably done yourself. So imagine that you're in a car and you're trying to localize yourself with respect to an overhead image that you might have gotten from a road atlas, or more commonly these days from Google Maps. And so one approach that you might take to this problem is to look out the window of your car and try to identify common structures, be they buildings or roadways or trees, and try to match the geometric arrangement that you're seeing or have seen over the last few seconds with corresponding places that you might be able to identify in the top-down map. So that's essentially the kind of idea that we've been working on implementing here. So the key issue there is one of making a correspondence between semantically meaningful concepts. So matching things like buildings that you can recognize both in terrestrial and in aerial imagery, or roadways, or rivers, or trees, or green spaces and the like. So on the figure on the right, what you're seeing is a result of a semantic analysis where different types of terrain, be they road or green space or building, are coded in different colors. And this is done using a deep neural network. So another kind of form of computation that has been very impactful, but also effectively accelerated using modern parallel processing techniques to the point where we can actually run these things again in real time on the kinds of embedded computers that we envision having. So here is an example of results of running the kinds of processing that we're envisioning. So what you're seeing is a overhead map. And the red areas that you saw evolving were an idea of where the robot could be. So again, this is a technique that uses kind of Monte Carlo computation that was mentioned earlier. So the robot maintains a couple of hypotheses for where it could be. And as it learns more over time, those hypotheses collapse into a single idea. And at this point, the robot knows where it is relative to the overhead map. And so this is a very useful way of localizing yourself with respect to a larger global context. It helps you to plan routes. It helps you to understand where you are with respect to other agents in the scene and the like. This is, again, the same technique applied to an area in Philadelphia. So once again, you see the red hypotheses collapsing down into a single idea of where the robot should be. And again, it is doing this by mapping by conducting a semantic analysis of what it sees, comparing it with the semantic analysis of what it's seeing in a top-down view, and using that as a basis for localizing itself with respect to all of these different locations. Once you're able to do that, you're able to actually go a little bit further. So for instance, now we're able to construct 3D maps where we refine the overhead image that might be incorrect due to changes in the environment or other features that are more visible to the terrestrial robot. And that gives us ways of building ever more accurate maps of the environment. Okay, so let me summarize as follows. This basic stored program computational model is sort of embodied in ENIAC, coupled with the advent of the transistor and miniaturization, are allowing us to apply computation at the edge, as in take our computational capabilities and marry them with sensors, marry them with actuators, do computation very close to where this information is being produced, which allows us to envision building systems that are increasingly capable, increasingly autonomous. The challenge that we have before us right now is to develop the kind of algorithms that really leverage this information and allow us to build systems that are truly robust. And I think that's going to be one of the major challenges going forward for the next 75 years.